This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
significant and protracted
political theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. What's not to like about political stories that encompass not only New York City, Queens specifically, but reach into Long Island's northern shore in Nassau County? The special election this week in New York's 3rd Congressional District to replace expelled Republican Rep George Santos is over, with Democrat Tom Suozzi defeating Republican Mazi Pilip for the honor of representing the birthplace of Walt Whitman and the one-time home of F. Scott Fitzgerald when he was gathering string for the Great Gatsby. Here to run us through it is our own Mel McIntire. She is one of our political reporters on the campaign desk. Mel, welcome back to Political Theater.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me.
And Jacob Rubashkin, the deputy editor at Inside Elections. Jacob, welcome.
Hi, Jason.
It's been a little while, and for both of you, this is your first time on YouTube for the Political Theater YouTube experience as well. So we're all excited. We're all excited about this. Thank you for coming on. And also, I realize that it has probably been a long week with this, although Tuesday night could have been longer. I was not expecting a 10 o'clock call by the Associated Press. Jacob, did that surprise you a little bit too?
Yeah, absolutely. Historically, New York has been pretty abysmal at election night reporting. And in fairness to that long and August trend, Nassau County still pretty bad at reporting vote on the
Doesn't
night
get
of.
better in the suburbs.
But Queens, I think Queens was the big shock. Queens was actually very quick to report most of its vote. We got almost all of the Queens vote before we got really any votes out of Nassau. And that was important because even though Queens is just 20% of the district, we knew pretty much exactly how well Suozzi needed to do in Queens to have an insurmountable lead. And he exceeded that mark. And so when the votes came in and we saw that with 70-80% of the vote, Suozzi had this 20 plus point lead in Queens, that was basically the ball game. And it was once we got even just a little bit from Nassau that the AP and then the networks felt comfortable calling the race, because it was clear Pilip wasn't going to put in such an overperformance in Nassau to counteract Suozzi's strength in Queens.
And also, I note too that the 10 o'clock calls by the AP and the networks, or 10-ish calls, came as she was conceding. Like she was conceding the race, on like New York 1 and so forth or whatever, and they were like, oh, we're not gonna get ahead of that, and then it's like, oh yeah, this is over, and it ended up being, is it still an 8-point margin? I saw with 93 or 94%, it was an 8-point margin. Is that right? Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So, Mel, you were up there in the district a couple weeks ago with ace staff photographer Tom Williams as well, capturing some images, capturing some reporting. Like, tell us about what you saw on the ground, because I mean, all indications were, again, this was going to be closer than it was. So, what did you get from a sense of when you were up there talking to people?
It was a little bit of a weird special election on the ground. And the most obvious example of that I can give is that I was up there the first weekend of early voting. Early voting started the Saturday that I got up there. And Mazi Pilip was not holding any public events. She was not, publicizing any campaign events. It looked like from her social media that, maybe she made a few unpublicized stops somewhere. But that was an interesting choice by her campaign to not be having public events. On the other hand, I went to 3 different Tom Suozzi events that weekend, all tied to early vote. He had a campaign office, a Women for Suozzi event, for example. He had representatives from pro-choice groups. He had New York Congresswoman Grace Meng there. And then, his staff brought people down the road to the early voting location so that everybody could start voting. He did this several times throughout the weekend. And actually, more times that he didn't even notice the reporters kind of thing. So that was definitely, the difference in how the campaigns were choosing to campaign was an interesting choice. But the other thing that I picked up on just from conversations, around town while I was there was that people didn't really seem to know there was a special election going on. There were campaign signs all throughout the district as we drove around, but people who I talked to, when I would ask, do you feel like people know this is happening? Everyone told me no. So I think some of that is, normal for a special election. We typically expect lower turnout, a little bit of a weird thing. But coming after such a high profile expulsion of George Santos, and then, followed by the fact that this just got so much national attention, I did think it was interesting that people kind of didn't seem aware that it was happening.
Yeah, it was, again, like you said, special elections are their own little universe. I mean, like you typically get only the most dedicated people who are tuned into politics or feel strongly about like the issues or the district to turn out. But in general, I mean, Jacob, this district is, even though it went for Biden and has been represented by a Democrat, for a long time, and this was Steve Israel's, district before Suozzi won it in a few years back, and then it was an open seat that Santos won. This has been like, it's not a lock for Democrats.
No, not at all. Long Island is pretty swingy, honestly. It's a region that's seen a lot of political shifts over the last couple of decades. I mean, you go back to when Suozzi kind of first came on the political scene in the 1990s and 2000s. And, he won the Nassau County executive race in 2001. And that was like a huge deal because Nassau County was a Republican stronghold. He was the first Nassau County executive to be a Democrat in over 30 years. And so we saw kind of the Democrats come into power in the early 2000s. Then there was a backlash. Suozzi loses two Nassau County executive races back to back. And in 2009 and 2013, Republicans sweep back into control. Then there's a big corruption scandal. Democrats come back. Then Republicans come back in kind of starting in 2019 and continuing onwards. So at the local level, this district has seen a lot of back and forth political shifts. And even though at the federal level, Democrats have typically been more successful, right? The Democratic presidential nominee has won this seat narrowly, but still, by a few points in the last couple of elections. And then, the state level folks, Schumer and Cuomo, back when he was running for governor, were very dominant here. The local political dynamics always indicated that there was the potential for Republicans to be successful at all levels of politics. And so 2022 rolls around, we see Lee Zeldin put up such a strong performance at the top of the ticket as the Republican gubernatorial nominee, and he really drags the entire GOP with him in this district. Every single Republican statewide.
Yeah, Long Island guy too.
No, exactly. I think this was, when it became clear that Zeldin was a real threat in that governor's race, it was because he had such strength on Long Island. There are a lot of people out there on Long Island. It's a decent chunk of the state, and so his performance there led the way for every other statewide Republican to carry this third district, which was really incredible. I mean, you had guys who spent maybe under $100,000 on their statewide races, beating Chuck Schumer and Tom DiNapoli and Tish James in this district.
And Mel, this was, there's the trends, which we just talked about, but also just right now, particularly with such an emphasis on immigration with the National Republican Party on down, Suozzi really was balancing a lot of different messaging. I mean, obviously the Democrats, you wrote a story going into the race earlier this week that this was going to be like, which message is going to break through, because Democrats want to emphasize abortion rights, but they kind of have to address immigration. Talk about like how this fine line that Suozzi had to walk in order to like sort of hit all of the issues that are going to be important in a district like this.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. We've seen Democrats ever since the Supreme Court issued the Dobbs decision really focus on abortion as a messaging point, obviously in the 2022 midterms, but as well as in special elections and other kind of offbeat elections that we've seen in the last couple of years. And Suozzi certainly campaigned on abortion. It was a part of his stump speech whenever he was out talking to people, but immigration really took over here, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, immigration in New York has been really prevalent as migrants have been flown to the city, come out to districts like this one, kind of right outside the city. And it's really been something that people have had to grapple with and have seen firsthand, as opposed to just being something that they might see on the news or something like that. And as well as the fact that in Congress, immigration has sort of been the top policy debate in the last couple of weeks. We saw the bipartisan Senate package come forward, and we saw Republicans really before it was even officially unveiled, turning against it. And so while Suozzi, maybe this wasn't the number one thing for him to talk about, he really was able to talk about this package and how he would support it, and criticizing Republicans for not supporting it, really able to cast himself as a centrist and point to previous work he had done while in Congress for 6 years before he left to run for governor. So he was really able to talk about this in a way that I think must have resonated with voters. Now, I think, a question going forward is, can other Democrats respond to that? Can they follow him in a way that, if he doesn't have the same, if they don't have the same experience that he'd had going forward? And I also, Jacob and I were both at a pen and pad yesterday with the DCCC chair, Susan Del Bene. She was really talking about abortion a lot too. So I don't think that it's necessarily a sign that Democrats are going to stop talking about this issue that's been so successful for them. But it does kind of show ways that, an issue that has typically been a strong issue for Republicans can also be a positive for Democrats.
And I can't help but think that Republicans perhaps unwittingly kind of helped Suozzi, by shooting down this bipartisan, border, security package that like Jim Lankford, an Oklahoma Republican, had helped, construct over several months. That they've got the thinnest of reeds anyway, to hold on to on the immigration issue, because the top of the ticket, because Biden, is perceived as like kind of opening the borders. That's the message that they're trying to communicate. But then now, Suozzi was able to say, in the last, week or so, hey, we're trying. And we're negotiating across bipartisan lines. Again, he gets to brandish that bipartisanship as a model, and we're ready to do this. But like this thing didn't even get out of the gate because the speaker is beholden to the most conservative parts of his party, and it seemed to, if at best what you're looking to do is neutralize it as a Democrat, it seemed to work.
Yeah, and I think he was really able to play up, like you said, James Lankford. This is a conservative Republican. This is not somebody who we often see in the
Rhino from Connecticut or something.
Right, exactly. And Mazi, a few weeks before the election, kind of came out against the package, siding with most other House Republicans. And so he was really able to sort of change this and be like, look, I'm the person who wants to actually get something done on this issue. Which, if that might have been what voters wanted there, rather than, the question of, do voters want Republicans to have this as a campaign issue in November?
Jacob, Pilip was a very, not your kind of typical Long Island Republican, kind of Rick Lazio, Peter King type, candidate. I mean, she's an immigrant. She's an Ethiopian Jew. She's Black. She's a registered Democrat who's running on the Republican line, who said that she was going to change her registration. How much, this is always a, weird issue to bring into this, but how much was race, and her background a factor in this race from, just looking at the demographics of the district itself? It's a pretty diverse district, but like anytime one candidate is white and one candidate is Black, the race does come into the issue.
Yeah, I don't know how much race played in on that angle, at least. I mean, the district is pretty diverse. It doesn't have a very significant black population. It does have, large pockets of Asian American voters and some Hispanic voters as well, and South Asian voters. Uh, I am a little hesitant to ascribe kind of, a, a racial aspect to her loss necessarily. I mean, look, this is the same district where Republicans lined up to vote for a gay, half black Brazilian man last cycle by an overwhelming margin, right? I don't think that you would have had such support for George Santos against, again, a guy, Robert Zimmerman, who was like classic old school Long Island, um, very much fit the part of politicians from the district. So I don't know how far I'd go in that direction. I think that if anything, it was probably her background was an asset. It was a huge asset to her
She's also in the
campaign.
military and the Israeli Defense Forces
She was in the IDF, and look, this district has a significant Jewish population. It has a significant Persian Jewish population, which is made up of a lot of immigrants and first generation Americans who fled Iran after the revolution. It has significant immigrant populations from other parts of the world. And those were communities that Pilip really sought to leverage her background when speaking to. I mean, the Persian Jewish population was already kind of her base in Great Neck. That's who she represented in the county legislature. She had really deep ties there. A lot of them registered Democrats like she was, who were never going to vote for Tom Suozzi. So, look, I think that her background, on balance, certainly was an asset. The fact that she had this super compelling story, the fact that post October 7, she, could lean on her biography as a former IDF soldier to speak with a level of personal connection to what's going on in Israel that really no one else, running for office these days can hope to achieve. I think all of those were positives for her, and probably had a big part to do with why she was selected as the nominee in the first place. I don't know. I certainly didn't hear when I was up there kind of a hesitance from anyone to support her because she was a Black woman.
One of the things you noted in your story, or for your takeaways story, Mel, was that kind of out of the gate, the presumptive Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump posted on his social media platform, Truth Social, that this was a foolish woman. I don't know what. Obviously, we don't know what the future for Pilip is. She's relatively young, certainly for politics, certainly for Washington. She's young, but that had to have stung, like not just her personally, when powerful people go after you, but also just the county in the Republican officials who were like, no, we're trying to show that we're a diverse party, and we get the guy who's at the top saying a foolish woman. I wonder about her future now in Republican politics.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting, the statement that Richard Hudson, the NRCC chair, put out after the race was called was that she has a bright future in politics. And then that Trump statement came out, sort of casting a doubt on, would Republican voters choose her? They have a primary in June, I believe, to pick the nominee for the full term in November, who will theoretically go up against Tom Suozzi. But
Santos is available. Nothing says he can't run again.
that would be something. That would be an interesting one for sure. But yeah, I mean, before the special election, you had several candidates from both parties who were running for this seat, raising money. So, we haven't really heard from anyone so far that, unless it's come through in the last couple of hours and I've missed it, that has sort of said, I'm definitely running again or I'm not running. But I think you'll definitely see a number of Republicans running for this seat, and whether or not Mazi is included in that group, we'll see. I mean, I think with Trump's statement, she had sort of tried to walk a line with Trump, I think, throughout the campaign. for a while, she didn't really seem to want to comment one way or another. And then sort of in the last, I would say probably 2 weeks, she sort of seemed more open to him, saying that if he wanted to come campaign with her, which he did not, he would be welcome, and sort of seeming more open to that. But I mean, her challenge there is that obviously this is a blue state. The district went for Biden by 8 points 4 years ago. So it's not clear if, voters there have all of a sudden had a change of heart to Donald Trump, broadly outside of, the core Republican base.
Right. Jacob, you and Nathan moved your rating of this from toss-up to tilt Democratic. Talk about some of the reasoning behind that for the November race. It was a toss-up until Tuesday night.
So we moved it to lean. So we moved it to 2 categories. Look, I think that it's a reflection of a pretty fundamental change in the status quo. We've gone from what was a Republican-held seat in a swing area to a Democratic-held seat in a swing area, but not just a seat held by a Democrat, but a seat held by a Democrat who is functionally a multi-term incumbent, right? I mean, he's been out of office for a year and a month, give or take, right? He'll get sworn in 2 weeks. So really, we're looking at kind of a continuation of the past 6-7 years of Suozzi, with kind of a brief Santos interregnum. But functionally, he's not a freshman, right? He's not a freshman Democrat. I don't think that's a fair way to think about him. He just won an election by a decent margin. And this is an area that we still anticipate Joe Biden to carry, even if it's significantly more narrow than his 2020 win, right? Like, he won this district by 8 points in 2020. It's not out of the realm of possibility that this could be a 2-point race in the presidential election. I think Long Island has shown that it is very fed up with Biden in a way that and more open to Trump in ways that, like, a lot of the other suburban parts of the country maybe are unhappy with Biden, but still more Trump skeptical. I think there's something about Long Island that does, in fact, make it more likely that Trump could be successful out here in ways that he wasn't in 2020. But on kind of basic, you've got a Democratic incumbent with a bunch of demonstrated strength in a district that was carried by Biden by a decent margin in 2020, and a very unsettled Republican field. We don't know who the candidates are going to be, and they've just taken this big loss, their first big loss in the area in 4 years. So all of that speaks to a Democratic advantage. The other thing that's going on here, of course, is that we're heading into a redistricting process.
Yes. As we're recording this, the Independent Redistricting Commission might forward their recommendations.
that
might alter, like, specifically these sort of suburban districts around New York City.
Exactly. So who knows what this district is going to look like, not just when the IRC gets done with it, but the IRC is just the first step in a process that ultimately ends up in the Democratic-dominated state legislature. And we'll see what they do. They got slapped down last time when they tried to gerrymander the heck out of the state, especially on Long Island, right? Long Island looked drastically different. This district, the 3rd district, what they tried to do with that district last time, they took it up to Westchester, right? They crossed the Long Island Sound in an attempt to shore up this seat. You had Alessandra,
even more of a journey from Queens to Nassau.
Exactly. You had Alessandra Biaggi, who was a state legislator from the Hudson Valley, running in this seat. So who knows what the bounds are for what the state legislature will do. I do think that it is less likely they significantly alter this seat now that Suozzi has won it, because, again, he is going to be the favorite heading into the fall. And so they have to extend themselves less to help him. And I think that frees them up to probably go after the other 2 vulnerable Republicans on Long Island, Nick LaLota out in the 1st district and Anthony D'Esposito down in the 4th.
And just to, like, some maybe people who are not from New York or not from the Northeast, or New England, like you are, Mel, like they may be listening to this and just saying like, how different could it be Westchester to Nassau County or whatever? And it's just like, you have no idea, folks. I mean, like how weird and like territorial like some of these places are. I mean, there are bagels that you can only get in Nassau County that you can't get if you go to Queens or Brooklyn, like the everything egg bagel. Like it's not available in New York City. You can't get it there. You can only get it on Long Island, in Nassau and Suffolk County. I mean, it's just like, it's this weird like part of the universe. And I mean, granted, like the three of us this is what we do for a living, right? Like we live for these sort of things, but like New York is even more weird than other weird parts of the country. Mel, we also, like, some of the consequences of this is that we have one fewer Republican in the House, and the margin wasn't like particularly huge to begin with. I mean, I thought about this, that on Tuesday evening, the House impeached Alejandro Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary, by one vote. And then 2 hours later, Suozzi was declared the winner in this district. So it's just, like the margins that we're talking about are just so tight.
Yeah, I mean, that vote, it really worked out timing wise for Republicans that Majority Leader Scalise was able to return to Washington after his cancer treatment, before Tom Suozzi is going to be sworn in. Such tight numbers the week before. We had obviously seen that go down on the floor in pretty dramatic fashion. I don't know. Yes, it makes a slim margin even slimmer. Does it functionally make it that much more difficult for Republicans? No, I don't think so. We've already seen them looking to put bills under suspension. So I don't think that this necessarily I don't think this is going to change like bills that could have passed by one vote. I don't think there's too many of those out there. But it just really underscores, and does, I guess, it's one less vote when you're counting, but it just underscores the slim margin. And for Democrats, it's one less seat that they need to flip to win back the majority next year or this year.
Yeah, now they can just focus on Mike Lawler and D'Esposito and Lalata, some of the folks you just mentioned, Jacob. I mean, that they're now the majority runs through Long Island and the Hudson River Valley, it seems. Well, Jacob, Mel, thank you very much. I know, this is what we live for. I don't know if other people live for it, but like, I love talking about this stuff. I still want to try that everything egg bagel at some point, although it does require, a different passport to get out to Nassau. So.
I'll bring it back for you next time.
But yes, our colleague here at CQ Roll Call, Dakota Braun, a Long Island native, was the one who clued me in on the everything egg bagel, which I had never heard of, and I consider myself up on the many different iterations that are available for that little bit of gluten goodness. Anyway, Jacob, Mel, thank you so much for talking about this. We'll have you back on another time. Welcome to the YouTube, part of it again. And thanks again for walking through an incredibly complicated place here on Political Theater.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks.